But going back to these bases and monuments that exist that seem to glorify the Confederacy. And part of this is, and I think there's probably a northern and southern view of this, probably a west and an east coast view of this. We just don't know much about our history, do we? And as a result, we hear these names and think, well, that sounds innocuous, but we just don't know the history, do we?
Well, in fact, it's even worse than not knowing the history, is that we were, at least I was fed, we were fed a story that was created by those who lost the war. It's called the Lost Cause of the Confederacy myth, and it started really by Robert E. Lee at Appomattox, and it infected our entire nation. Not really starting right after the war, but it really infects the entire nation after we go to war with Spain, and then in 1917 against Germany. And these elements are that really infected our nation. Says that the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery; it was fought over states' rights. Well, it was fought over the states' rights to have slaves, but slavery is clearly the reason, and that's what all the states said. But that was hidden after the war. There's another part of this myth that says enslaved people were happy. That's what Jefferson Davis said after the war. But of course, that's just miserably awful. Slavery involved the rape, the lash, selling families apart for profit. It was saying that Reconstruction, bringing the country together after the war, was a failure because Black people weren't ready for the vote or to serve in high office. Not true at all. 2,000 Black men served in high office. It said that Ulysses S. Grant was a butcher and a drunk. Not true. Grant was one of the greatest soldiers ever to wear Army blue. And it said finally that Robert E. Lee was not only the greatest soldier who ever lived, the finest man who ever lived. And that's what I grew up with. And this lie that was created by Southerners, particularly Southern women, it took over our understanding of the war and led to these monuments coming up, which is part of the system of white political power in the South. Monuments, racial terror, disenfranchisement of Black America, all these things come simultaneously to enforce white political power.
And like a lot of history, this ripples through the decades and the years. Let's go back to Robert E. Lee for a minute, because I think it's a good example of there was sort of a myth portrayed to hold this man up. He was sort of a tortured soul, wanted to be with the Union troops, but had to go back to Virginia. Tell us a little bit about what history shows as the truth about this as compared to maybe the sanitized Hollywood version that people have been fed over the years.
Like what you heard? Listen to this full episode and more on the Apple Podcasts app, Blog Talk Radio, Google Podcasts, or iHeartRadio. And now streaming on Amazon Music, Audible, and Spotify.